I would like to thank all of you for coming out on today, beginning of Black History Month. This is the inaugural Dr. A.J. Williams Myers Black History Month lectures. Come on, let's put our hands together. Dr. Williams Myers, we know he was a staple for the Black Studies Department here at SUNY New Paltz. He transitioned over the summer. One of the missions of the Black Studies Department was to make sure that we could do something that would honor him and continue his legacy. In African tradition, the belief is that our ancestors, once they cross over, that they're not gone, but they continue to interact with us from another realm. So we pray and we hope that Dr. Williams Myers is pleased, and we felt that honoring him, his work, his life, and his legacy would be a great way to kick off this Black History Lecture Series. In the spirit of Sankofa, we always look back at our past in order to move forward. So the Black Studies Department, we recognize the shoulders in which we stand on. We recognize the work from previous faculty, previous chairs, all the work and the effort that past Black Studies faculty have put forth, and we seek to do them proud. So today it is my honor that we have with us someone who is on the board of the A.J. Williams Myers African Roots Center. I'm looking forward to what he has to say. I'm not going to put all that dressing on it because I want to give him some pressure, leave some pressure on him a little bit. All right, but I'm so looking forward to what he has to share for us, and hopefully we can learn. Hopefully we'll have questions. If there's some time at the end, we can have some questions and an answer period. But I want to welcome to SUNY New Paltz, and I also want to welcome the first lecturer of the Dr. A.J. Williams Myers Black History Month Lecture Series. Please, let's put our hands together for Brother Ethan Scott Barnett.
Well, this is interesting. I'm grateful to be here. So as I was planning this lecture, there were a lot of things going through my head. But to start, we're going to do 2 parts before I get started. So I'm going to ask 2 things of you, and then I'm going to get into my intro and kind of why I'm here and what I'm doing. So the first thing is we're going to talk about the 3 B's of blackness. All right? So if you can repeat after me, it's like a call and a response. All right? Are we good? We got this? So the first B is for black.
Black.
Say with me. B is for black.
B is for black.
B is for beautiful.
B is for beautiful.
B is for brilliant.
B is for brilliant.
Okay, so now black is beautiful.
Black is beautiful.
Black is brilliant.
Black is brilliant.
Black is black.
Black is black.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then the second part, if y'all can just let me know either if you're from a department or a student, real quick, if you can just shout it out. Anyone?
Former student.
Former student?
Provost.
Provost?
Student.
Student?
Yes.
Guest?
Adjunct faculty.
Adjunct faculty?
Former student. Student.
Department.
Student. Former student.
Okay, thank you. This helps me figure out about how much you can fact check as I go through this. Which I think is really important. So my name is Ethan Scott Barnett. I'm a board member at the A.J. Williams Myers African Roots Center. We are located at 43 Gill Street in Kingston, New York. A.J. came into my life just after I had finished my undergraduate degree at the CUNY Baccalaureate Program for Unique and Interdisciplinary Studies. I had grown up in Accord. I went to Rondout Valley High School, and then Rondout. Listen, if someone does it, we gotta support it. So I went to Rondout, where I was one of 13 black people, entire school, 13 black people, teachers included, right? Out of 1,300 people. So it gave me an understanding that there is this egalitarian society where Martin Luther King was what we all sought to be, and then there was like George Bush, right? Those were your opposite. Like, this is the dynamic that I grew up in. Are we good? Was there a sound? Was that a burp?
That's my
Okay. So that's kind of where the framework I grew up in. I did not ask questions about what Africans were doing in the Hudson Valley. I didn't do that for a very long time. I didn't do that until really like 2015, 2016. I'm very much a 20th century person, where I think about how black people have fought for liberation in like kind of my lifetime, and before that, really, like, I could not conceive of the formation of the NAACP within the first decade of the 20th century. I was like 1945, and anything before it is ancient history. Someone's gonna enter the classroom. Come on in. Come on in. We've been waiting for you. So it is an honor to be the first speaker, the inaugural Dr. A.J. Williams Myers Black History Month lecture series for the SUNY New Paltz Black Studies Department. When Professor Dandridge and Dr. McWilliams reached out, I thought to myself, well, I have 10 days to create a lecture. What can I speak on? What should I speak on? What would AJ want me to speak on? Dr. Williams Myers has an incredible series of events that represent his undying love for the people of the African descent. He regularly was a consistent and dedicated person to fighting for the liberation of oppressed peoples in the United States, but also across the globe, and most importantly in Africa. He had a beautiful and radical marriage to his wife Janice, where not only were they raising kids together, but they were fighting against injustice step by step, arm in arm. He raised 2 beautiful children and has donated his life's work to a community center in which I'm lucky enough to be on the board of. However, I know too little, and his life is too grand to pretend. Every time I step into the archive, I'm blown away about how much he has done, and I'm also embarrassed for how little I actually know. So as I formulated this talk, I was like, I'm going to do something grand. I'm going to cover his life. I know every single detail. I know where he was when he was fighting for apartheid. I know where he was when he was attacking Black Studies departments across the United States, especially at Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, for being mediocre representations of intellectual stimulation, right? I know all of this. And then I'm looking at his CV from 1979 when he was finishing his dissertation, and I was like, I didn't know he was a community organizer at his first year in college. And that's when it rocks you and your ego's crushed and you're like, all right, let me slow down and let me present on what I know. And so this may not be the traditional long swath of information, but I'm going to focus on a few things that I find to be really important. And bear with me as I figure out, this presentation, because it was literally 25 minutes before I was leaving the house, and I was like, I just found out so much new information about him that I no longer feel comfortable with what I was going to present, because I feel like it'd be an injustice to him. Okay, so originally I thought A.J. Williams Myers is born in Jersey City at the name of Albert Williams Myers. That is not true. So this was the first thing that I was proven wrong. And AJ's actually born in Edison, Georgia on March 10th, 1939. He will, and this is where the story I think some of us know, will end up in New Jersey. He does get adopted by Bishop C. Kilmer Myers, who becomes a legendary bishop across the United States. And this is kind of where he gets his opportunity to be a thriving scholar. This is AJ with his other adopted siblings, and this is his mother, Katie Leah Kay, who is also an activist in her own right. So then that's kind of where his TMI project news story gets in, right? He records with the TMI project, I think in 2016 or 2017, and this is where he kind of tells a little bit of life story that we know about him. So what ends up happening, and this was literally information that I came across an hour and a half ago. So again, bear with me. So he graduates from Watkins Prep School in Hartford, Connecticut in 1958, right? So again, this is not New Jersey. And then he goes on to Wagner College in Staten Island, and that's this point of his life where he meets Janice. Janice is also a revolutionary in her own right. She's figuring out what college she wants to go to. She's thinking about international travel. She's thinking about these organization issues on a longer, more global scale. So while he's in college, and just as he graduates, he signs up to be a group work leader and starts working for the organization Mobilization for Youth, right? So he has graduated, he sees the opportunity that we have people within these cities, within New York City, in the Lower East Side, who need to be mobilized. 1962 is also 6 years after Brown versus Board of Education. New York City is dealing with their own integration. New York City is not desegregated. New York City is got these, what we term ghettos, and they're burning. They are setting on fire. We have really terrible mayors there, and AJ makes the decision as someone who had recently graduated to get straight into the work and says, I need to organize with youth, right? He's not thinking about grad school. He's specifically thinking about that the grassroots mobilization strategy is what's going to bring some sort of liberation. He will also teach in high school, and then from 1964 until 1966, he will continue to work with the youth in New York City. In 1966 is when he's already married. He marries in 1962. Is this too far? Black Studies. Is when he joins the Peace Corps, right? And this will be the foundation for his work on his dissertation. So while AJ goes to Malawi, right, this is also where his daughters will be born. This is where his life kind of gets the roots for the African internationalist perspective that he'll have once he does his PhD. So he's in Malawi until 1966, and that's when he starts applying for grad schools. So as he applies for grad schools, he says, how do I come back to the United States? I've just worked abroad. I've done these opportunities to build schools, to understand the health conditions in Central Africa, and I'm seeking to build and grow my understanding of the movement in the United States and at home. So then he goes ahead and he starts working at a hospital, and he's a lab assistant, right? Again, this is someone who's worked with youth. He's organized in Africa, he's organized in the United States, and now he's saying the number one signifier is health. So while there, this is when he starts to apply for grad schools. He'll apply in 1969. At the same time, he starts interning for California Assembly and Bill Green. I do not have any information on Bill Green. And that's when he gets really invested in Black studies. So in 1971, he'll graduate from UCLA with his degree in Black Studies. Right now, so we're 8 years out from his entrance to SUNY in 1979. While he graduates, this is where I find he starts leading his serious path into the Black Studies and academic world. So just a quick understanding, because I think there's a way that Black Studies is kind of thrown off as this like less intense, less rigorous mode of intellectual stimulation. You're like, well, it's not Europe, and it's not Latin America, and it's not all of these things, but we know that Black people are in all of those diasporas, right? We know that Black people have roots all across the world. And I also think there's a way that when we think about AJ just coming to be chair of the department in 1979, that it gets kind of thrown around that like, the Black Studies department just needed a chair and they were willing to take anyone because it's a SUNY school in upstate New York, but we have to like frame that as like this is one of the most legendary SUNY programs, and for him to become chair is a huge deal. So how does he become chair? He will become a lecturer at the Black Studies program at Cal State in Long Beach, and then he becomes student assistant director of the African Studies Center at the University of California, UCLA. And then he leaves the United States and goes and does fieldwork in Zambia, London, Rome, Lisbon, under a Foundation graduate fellowship. which anyone who's applied to any PhD fellowship, you know this is an extremely rigorous process that has up to like 30 to 40 papers along with like 5 to 6 recommendations, right? So he's growing at the top of his field. He then teaches at Pasadena College, and then he becomes a lecturer at the Department of History at UCLA again. From there, he teaches at UC Riverside, and this is kind of when he's finishing his PhD. So he's taught at 5 different universities in the California system. He's finishing his dissertation. I don't know if any of you have seen his dissertation in person, but it's 351 pages long, and the majority of that is oral histories that he's transformed into primary sources. It's a very impressive manuscript, and I was looking through it, and this is kind of the responsibility of the African Roots Center in this moment, is that when he passed this summer, is that we started to get a small bit of his papers, right? So AJ's a very private person, and we've had to ask the ethical questions of like, what do we share with the public? What don't we share with the public? How long does it take to interpret these sources? But overall, some of the critiques from his graduate school advisors is that his project is going to change the field, right? He's studying different ethnic groups in Central Africa, and right, so this is where his dissertation focuses on Central Africa and different ethnic groups and their relationship to the understanding of oral histories and what's valid and what's not. AJ will then teach in Minnesota for, I believe, 3 years, and that is after, that's where he starts becoming tenure track professor, and this is when the SUNY New Paltz job comes up to become chair. So as many of you know, AJ's felt called here, right? I think for people of the African diaspora, there's a relationship to the Hudson Valley that can be kind of tense, but also really joyful, in the sense that you are not surrounded by a lot of people from the African diaspora, right? And there's this longing, and there is this kind of heartache that you are not regularly surrounded by your community. At the same time, AJ's drawn here from from an act he did, I think, 25 years prior, when he's filling out a crossword puzzle in New Jersey, and he spells out New Platts, right? So as the spirit, as he said in his words, the spirit of Sojourner Truth calls him here. And for me, I don't think he gets there without his study in Africa, without understanding these oral traditions, and without this larger spiritual sense that people of all shades and identities, but specifically people of the African diaspora, are regularly going through the social and emotional, multi-generational relationship in which they're seeking to find something that was lost, right? They're seeking to identify the Sankofa in themselves. They're seeking to reduce and minimize this fractured sense of identity and history. And I think him coming here and understanding that there's this larger body of work is what brings him and keeps him here, right? Because I think staying at a university is just as crucial as coming to one. When he gets to New Paltz, and if y'all, this is where I do not have the documentation. This is where I have lore. But from what I understand, New Paltz is a hotbed for activism in that moment, in the 1970s and 1980s. This is one of those moments where African apartheid's happening. This is where African independence is still grasping or breaking the shackles from neocolonialism across Europe. This is a moment where people in New York City are taking up the issue of police brutality. There's an environmental fight going on around here. This is what I have for myth. I do not know exactly what happened. I'm sure there are AJ students who will contact me, hopefully over the next few years, and being like, this is what I was doing there. This is how I was organizing. This is what I was believing in. This is how the Black Studies Department was growing. This is how SUNY New Paltz stopped funding the Black Studies Department, and all of the things that we're still trying to figure out today. So again, we know Margaret Wade Lewis, Dr. Margaret Wade Lewis, brilliant scholar, legendary person. I do not have the information that really connects the relationship between Dr. Williams Myers, Dr. Zelda Moore, also another brilliant scholar and legendary person. I don't know more about their relationship, and this is something that I hope to kind of flush out. And when I get through more of AJ's papers, I'll understand their correspondences and kind of what's going on.
And Dr. Moore will be here next week.
Beautiful. So maybe when we come back, we can time machine and put some of that information into this presentation. So I think so what I'm going to do now is focus on Janice. And again, some of y'all, I'm going to take a sip of water. Still good? Audio still good?
Yep.
Okay. So I think there's a way that when we write about brilliant black men, we omit their friends and family around them, right? If we write about Frederick Douglass, Douglass just went up and down the Northeast Corridor, funded by abolitionists, that's it. There was no family, nothing happened. Lies. When we write about Martin Luther King, Coretta was just a side piece. Lies. Most radical woman in the 20th century, hands down, from her birth until she's continuing to fight for AIDS at the end of her life in the queer community. And I think in the relationship between AJ and Janice, especially those who are my age, I'll say, or who have met AJ in the later years of his life, you just saw AJ and Janice as kind of like this really beautiful couple and representation of black love. But as I write about AJ, I'm like, we cannot forget about this, right? We cannot forget about this, because she is also in the trenches doing this work. She's organizing in New York City. She is participating in these international trips. She's also raising kids during this time, right? She is everything he writes, every book he writes. If you look in these books on the Morning Tide and Long Hammering, you will see an acknowledgement to her and like, thank you for reading through this manuscript and giving me a critique, right? So I think we must think of her activism when we also think of his. I think Janice also pulls the political education into the community side out of him, right? Because she's not at a university. Her husband works at a university, but she's not teaching here. So these are two instances. This is 1985 through 1988, where, I don't know which one to touch. Right, we have, in 1985, she is running for District 8, and I'm still trying to figure out this. I think it's District 8's now more District 12, because District 8 is a SOPIS, but Ulster County Legislative for District 8. She is fighting for affordable housing. She is fighting for seniors' rights, which are still overlooked. She is fighting for waste management. And for those of you who, if you're thinking about the current movement for environmental justice right now, you know that our waste facilities are usually corrupt and have some sort of relationship to fracking and corrupt government contracts, right? So she was fighting against this at this time. There's a documentary that will come out about Middletown and how some high school students will actually find a relationship to mob ties to waste management in upstate New York. And these high schoolers are the ones who are just casually uncovering it. And while I say casually, it's very intentional, because they're going to these random fields where dump trucks are dumping. They hide in the woods, they film them dumping, and then they confront these people who turn out to be the mob. And then Senator, I don't know actually what his type, Maurice Henchy will get involved, and they'll push the case up to the New York Supreme Court. So that's kind of the environmental justice movement going around. And Janice will take that on. At that time, she's already been graduated from the University of Minnesota, Peace Corps, New Paltz Democratic Committee person, employed at IBM, married to AJ, and 2 daughters. So there's a clear identity where, in my mind, she's watering herself down, right, for this liberal white community in which she lives in. And because at the same time, she's participating in these movements alongside AJ. That's another one of her flyers. She will go and be an alternate at the Democratic Convention. During Jesse Jackson's campaign is where we see her canvass all of Ulster County. She's got flyers and flyers. Here's a thank you note that she drafted that all the volunteers were to copy and then send out to everyone who participated in the movement. She's got newspapers from Jesse Jackson. She's got ephemera. She will go to southern states like Mississippi, Alabama, Texas to participate in the movement and canvass the rural roads of Mississippi, which I think we can think about the civil rights movement and how dangerous that is, and we can think about today about how dangerous these spaces are for Black people. So she's doing that work in the South, in the in the North, 20th century, in the South, in upstate New York, and she's also doing this on an international level. So she's alongside AJ every step of the way. And again, if you know more about Janice and want to let me in on whatever she's done, I'd be really excited to hear about it. When Kevin Cahill spoke at AJ's memorial, he had a really beautiful assessment of all the work that Janice had done locally that I'm still trying to get him to send me. Okay, so this is my hot take, really exciting. Sorry, spoiler alert, I'm not going to really talk about these books, but you should buy them. And this is my intervention into AJ's work, because I think that the work he does on Ulster County is so important, and the Hudson Valley. He changes how we think about this every single day. We don't get to think about Black people in the Hudson Valley. We don't get to think about how many slaves the Dutch owned. We don't understand that prior to the Civil War, New York City and Albany are the largest slave ports above the Mason-Dixon line, or what will become the Mason-Dixon line, right? We don't get to understand that without AJ. We don't understand that Juneteenth is also happening in New York without AJ, and I don't want to discredit that, but I think that these reports and presentations that he has specifically come when he is at the New York African American Institute, which is kind of this great period. Let me take that back, which is kind of this very clear period about his New York statewide presence. So while he's living in New Paltz, he's also working out of Albany, and he's doing this work on a statewide level. So for me, the three reports that stick out the most there's two reports on AIDS and HIV that are published in the year 1990. So at this point, AIDS has killed hundreds of thousands of people. The serious peak point is in between 83 and 85. And this is also an era where we have mass incarceration booming, right? From these policies, from LBJ, from Nixon, from Reagan, and what we'll now know as the Clintons and Joe Biden. But up until this moment, AJ decides, I'm going to focus on AIDS because this is a statewide issue, and this is also happening in Africa. And for me, when you think about academics who get to make decisions about what they study and what they don't study, in this moment, prisons and criminalization and police brutality, that's the hotter topic, right? That's the topic that's going to get you more publications. That's the topic that's going to get you the New York Times spread. That's the topic that's going to get you the accolades, the letter from Harvard where they want to, come pick you out from SUNY New Paltz. That's the letter. And he makes a decision, and he's like, no, we need to understand this issue within our community, right? So there are two, right? So he continues to write these reports, and he writes them every, I believe, 6 to 8 months. But this one is, right, so this is, again, what we call the intersectional identity. So, right, there's the general case about new strains of AIDS, and then he goes on to talk about how AIDS education needs to start from kindergarten and up, right? So right now we have this conversation about variants and vaccines, and when we can even teach people about Blackness, right? And he's saying you need to start telling kids about AIDS and teaching them in kindergarten. He's saying this needs to be at the center of their lives if they're going to move forward throughout the 20th century, which I think even now, if for those of you who have kids, or those of you who want to have kids, or thinking about kids, or just know kindergartners, if you went to them and you're like, this is what AIDS is, I think that would be a very complicated and radical conversation, especially since it's not in the front lines of our press anymore. He then goes on to make the case that the next thing we need to do with AIDS education is move it into prisons, right? Because he's saying that these prisons are becoming an incubator and that so many people are going in them that spreading of AIDS keeps happening. He doesn't say we need to get rid of prisons, but he is insinuating that there's a problem with them. And then he goes on to say we need to think about AIDS as it spreads to Africa, right? Because it's getting out of control. So the next thing is on an international level. And he says this is essentially our opportunity to get control of this as a Pan-African movement, right? What's happening in the United States for our children, for our folks in prison, and now for people on the African continent is something that we can support in this movement as members of the New York African American Institute. The two other reports that I want to focus on, this is like a really beautiful title. It's not. It's called A Potent Weapon Against Racism and Its Saving Grace in the 21st Century in Light of the Martin Luther King Legacy. Are you willing to fashion and use it? And this is given at Vassar College on January 24th, 1990. So I'm going to read from this, and I'm sorry that I didn't scan it. This is going to be a few minutes, but this is essentially his critique and also his question for young people to start participating in the movement. And again, this is 1990. So I think what we consider is radical and what's not this is kind of going into his legacy. And I'll let you, I'm reading specifically from his words because I don't think it's appropriate to paraphrase right now. A potent weapon and its creative use. I want to take the time now as a way to conclude by talking about that potent weapon and its use in putting us on the road to that beloved community, right? That's MLK's phrase, and getting us there in the 21st century, a new millennium. That potent weapon is you and you, black, white, brown, red, and yellow, Christian, Jew, Muslim, Buddhist, pro-choice, anti-abortionist, environmentalist, gay, lesbian, the young, the old, the midlifers, etc., etc. But the vanguard will be you, the young students and other young people who feel a sense of mission and love for America somewhere and at some time in the 21st century, free of racial hate, bigotry, anti-Semitism, sexism, elitism, and all other isms that stain and corrupt the soul. When I say the vanguard that will get us on the road to the beloved community will be the young students and other young people. It does not necessarily mean that I have given up on the old and midlifers, as I have aged over the years and have seen America move farther and farther from the realization of Martin's beloved community, especially with her destiny in the hands of the midlifers and old generations. I have come more and more to believe that if America is going to be saved, it will have to be done by the youth of this country demanding constructive change. Very quickly, what comes to mind when I speak of America's youth, for one, the civil rights movement of some decades ago. Their young black male and female students at South Carolina A&M College decided that they had had enough of Southern segregation and decided to do something about it. They attempted to get in white sections of restaurants and attracted to a rainbow of young people dedicated to bringing about sweeping socioeconomic changes in a country that prided itself on being a leader among nations in the free world. Many lost their lives for this cause. Students like Michael Sherwer, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and the young Medgar Evers. The first three are all students of Queens College, CUNY Queens College, right? So this is a call to our people. Then there were young men and women who gathered around the young Baptist minister in Montgomery, Alabama, and decided it was better to walk than to continue to ride segregated buses. So they walked until Montgomery officials decided that segregated buses weren't worth preserving if it meant the continued loss of revenue dollars, right? That's an anti-capitalist stand. Let us not forget this free speech movement, predominantly white students, but composed of many who had learned strategies from the civil rights movement, pay dues to black folks, through involvement in the Southern sit-ins and bus rides into the South organized by SNCC, and other organizations such as Congress of Racial Equality. Remember, it was those morally committed young people on college campuses that challenged the positions of institutions of higher learning across the country that on the so-called lockout of the student involvement in the governing process. I think that's where I want to stop, right? But AJ's dedicated to igniting the youth, right? He's not just sitting at the academy, he's regularly engaged all across New York State, and he's just doing it because this is his calling, right? He has stayed in New Paltz, he is going up to Albany, he's going to Poughkeepsie, and he's made this decision that anywhere and everywhere he needs to participate in this movement. He's participating on a level, on a medical level, right? Rooted back to his time in California when he first comes back from the Peace Corps. He's participating. Here is a conversation on affirmative action. Here is his critique of, hello? That's embarrassing. Damn. I hope y'all are tapped into mutual aid networks. If you aren't, like, feed that fridge. This is really important. Sorry, we can talk about that after. But it was just someone who needs to pay their cable bill, right? Because these issues haven't stopped. These issues are consistent, and like people need $14 so they can keep their cable on or not. So this is the final thing I'm going to read. And this, I think this is like by far my favorite, and then we'll get into the African Roots Center. Sorry, let me just respond. Give me 21 hour. Cool. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I mean, like, the work comes first. The work always comes first. Okay, so this one is like fire. Christabel Colon, Education, and the Curriculum of Inclusion, right? So this is what we currently know as, what are they, anti-racism out of the curriculum? Can someone help me out? Y'all know what is that it? Does that sound right?
Yes, you're talking about anti-racism?
Yeah, but what are they trying to get out of schools?
Critical race
Okay.
Thank you,
Okay.
critical race theory.
Okay.
Right, so this is the original critical race theory conversation happening in 1991. But instead of being critical race theory, and he does have one that's specifically about the question, yeah, so he does have towards a curriculum of inclusion, a roundtable discussion, and an open invitation to prepare for that kinder and gentler America, right? So that's his first one he writes. And then, as we know, there are people who are resistant to what he's preaching and what he's arguing for. So to follow up the one on a gentler America, he then writes, the struggle to decolonize information in the education of children of color, right? Which has a little bit more bite to it. Because I still don't think in the current conversation about critical race theory, thank you, and anti-racism, we're specifically talking about decolonization. And I think that also speaks to, this is someone who is an Africanist. This is someone who did their PhD work based on Africa, did their PhD work, wow, this is not, sorry. Homies, come on, I said an hour. Mad rude, no boundaries. I apologize. So here we are. Colonization, okay, so this is out of the chapter. Colonization, like slavery, was a system of human denial, cultural degradation, and plain and simple, the genocide of a people, the use and discarding of a people after enormous amounts of wealth had been accumulated. It is with colonization and its colonization of information, quote, as well as the monopolization of technology that social engineering comes into play. The withholding of or the distortion management of information is a conscious design to instill in the colonized or enslaved a vision of a world that is white-centered and in the image of the colonizer or slaveholder. Again, it is called social engineering, creating black people and other people of color who with white mind implants passively accept their oppression. The outcome of a process of education and of social engineering that is based on colonization of information is the world of the colonized turned upside down. He/she lacks knowledge of self because history is whited out and or claimed by the colonizers. There is self-degradation. He or she roots for Tarzan, and the chimp is Malcolm X's house Negro, asking his ill master, "Massa, we sick?" and is prone to the Michael Jackson syndrome of facial and body destruction. Think of it. The major outcome of this Africa, Asia, pardon my Spanish, las tierras de la primeros gentes, is what Walter Rodney and Manning Marable have tenured the underdevelopment of people of African ancestry and other freedom-loving peoples. Is fire. So this is his analysis of this critique of curriculum of inclusion. What are some of the implications of above for the students of color today, right, who we're all interacting with and who most of us are? The years to come if we do not implement curriculum of inclusion or some type of curriculum that speaks to the history, culture, and revolutionary tradition of a people. So this is him centering our history, our culture, and our people in education as a form of liberation. So he says if we don't get there, this is what will happen. 1, the continued inability of our children to know who they are, from whence they come, and what they must do if they are to preserve a rich legacy of a people in face of awesome and genocidal efforts. These efforts would be those of a morally bankrupt ruling critique to blot out the image of the people there would be continue to. So this, if we don't do this, right, it will be continue to have high crime rates in communities of color and an implosion. B, high incarceration of males and females of color. C, disproportionately high rates of socioeconomic ills, aka homelessness, high unemployment, lack of access to quality health service, continued poor quality education overall for students of color. And then lastly, he says, the controversy sounding curriculum of inclusion originating from the white educational establishment is simply a move to preserve the colonization of information and thus maintain a continuity with the past. It is an attempt, yes, an attempt to starve off the inevitable, the unfolding of the curriculum of inclusion by shouting, white is right, white is might, white is the light. And then these are the scholars who are proposing the white is right curriculum. Schenkers, Schechler-Vigris, and Glazers. They can stem the tide of curriculum of inclusion, as sure their rivers find the sea, so will the curriculum of inclusion come to fruition. So he's ready, right? Like he's ready. This isn't like he is ready to fight. He asked for a curriculum of multicultural education. All of these scholars hopped on a round table and said, no, we're not going to do that. This is ending, this is hurting our white children. This is going against the narratives. Why don't we know this? Blah, blah, blah. Why are you trying to hurt our feelings? And he's like, I want decolonization, right? He's like, I want you to feel this. I want my people to be liberated. If we provide them with this education and opportunities, this is our small chance to fight against poverty, to fight against inequality, to fight against poor schools, to fight against poor healthcare. When we give them these tools, this is where we grow. And for me, I read that earlier today, and I was like, I didn't know this, AK. Right? Like this is as we think about someone's legacy, I don't want it to get watered down, right? Because long hammering and On the Morning Tide do this gently, right? They're like, here's a long book, I want you to digest this over time, but he's putting out reports, multiple reports, 6 to 8 reports a year, and is like, we're fighting, and he's putting them out on a state level, so all these government officials, all the people in the Senate, all the people in the legislative, on a state level have to read these things, and then they're being debated on the floor of the Senate and the House. So here we are. This is where we are as of 2017. I think the photo on the left was actually taken in 2016 for the Hudson Valley newspaper. But this is him at the African Roots Center. So, right, our mission is really what comes out of this last report on decolonization and education. This is where we say, how can we put together the tools, put together the books, put together these ideas in a way that centers the African diaspora, right? Centers our people's history. And what he does, right, so he donates 16 boxes to start with. There are so many more boxes. A lot of these books are outdated. A lot of them say like wild language. A lot of them have, are out of print or out of update or different things, but he's given us this opportunity to say, first build on this radical tradition of Black people creating their institutions outside of educational structures so that they can uplift themselves, be in community, and ask the tough questions and ask the easy questions and just feel belonging, right? So he's tapping in by building this library with Odell, who's right here. He's tapping into this larger community narrative. He's tapping into that narrative that when Black people move here or when they grow up here, they don't feel a sense of self, and this is the opportunity to bring each other together. He's tapping into this ideology that not only, in the terms of Martin and Malcolm, there's a quote by Kwame Ture / Stokely Carmichael that says, Martin went around and mobilized thousands of people, and Malcolm built the mosque, right? So everywhere you go, there was a mosque, so everywhere you could go, you can learn and you can grow, and the African Roots Center is essentially that modern day mosque where you can go and you can talk about religions and you can talk about ideologies. You can understand that African people, not only across the world, but we also have changed the world everywhere we've gone or everywhere we've been forced to go. As it stands, I think last looking, and now we've gotten more books, donations consistently going. There are a few bookstores. Oblong Books and Rhinebeck's gives us a box of modern books from today every few weeks, and then there have a lot of been great donations. We're building out our special collections. But I think at this moment, between the children's books, one half is children, one half is nonfiction or leaning towards adult, we have over 4,000 books cataloged. So there are 4,000 books on the African diaspora. I'm not going to flex, but I'm pretty sure SUNY New Paltz Sojourner Truth does not have 4,000 books on the African Roots on the African diaspora. Bard College does also not have 4,000 books on the African diaspora. Marist does also not have 4,000 books on the African diaspora. Duchess does also not have 4,000 books on the African diaspora. So our little storefront, starting with AJ's collection, has now become the largest library / community center / educational institution, largest holding library on the African diaspora in the Hudson Valley. I'm not going to claim anything in New York City because that feels irrational. But so it's an exciting moment, right? And we're growing and we're learning as we go, and it's really awkward, and it's a very exciting time to be doing this work because I think, as Black Studies continues to grow and Black Studies is finding its place and taking authority over its identity, we also see that this education and art for ourselves emotionally and socially, but also culturally, has never been more important, right? Because this is a point where we have to make decisions on what we want our future to look like and how we want to think and how we want to express ourselves and what side of financial and social systems we want to live in going forward. So there we are. Thank you. Okay, questions, answers, stories? Yes.
I have a quick question. I did not have the opportunity to meet Dr. Williams-Myers at all. Heard a lot about him from the moment I came to SUNY New Paltz. So I guess my question to you, as best as you can answer, what do you think he would say about where the conditions of people of African descent in the Hudson Valley or in New York and Newport, what do you think his thoughts would be about where we are? You know, in your presentation, he seemed to be ahead of the curve in a lot of what he was articulating. So what do you think he would say about where we are in this moment right now? I know that's putting a lot on you.
I mean, I think he'd be optimistic. I think he'd be excited. I think we're on an upswing, right? We have the African Roots Center in Kingston. There are a lot of organizations, but there's a growing sense of cultural identity. Now, the way people tell these things may be fragmented, and you know, some people may need to read more books. But there is this consensus that like what we are doing and growing, like there's a movement here. It's tough. Movements are not easy. There's this myth that like just because you do activist work, it's like it's seamless, and it's not. But it's clear that Janice and AJ have continued to thrive. And if I'm correct, right? Again, plug these books. Highly, really worth reading. I actually have a whole list over here. But I would suspect that he believes in this. Like he really believes in us. Like he would not have done this work his entire life if he did not believe in this. And he, you know, like I think none of us are in our 80s. So I have been doing this work consistently since 2015. And every day is hard. Right? Like whether that's writing or reading or participating in movements in the streets, or whether that's bailing out the homies, or whether that's like getting the opportunity to speak somewhere or prepare, or whether that's just like giving someone food, right? And getting someone a meal at the end of the night. Like this is really hard work, and to participate in this every day and to have 15 boxes worth of books, you're not giving up. Because when you learn this information, like you can go crazy. If you live in the United States and everywhere you turn, someone's closing a door in your face, or everywhere you turn, someone's trying to invalidate your identity based on ethnic, sexuality, or gender, or class, right? Like, you go crazy. You would have to be crazy not to feel crazy in this society. And I think his dedication is something we learn from, and we say, keep going, like, keep pushing, keep going. There are a really exciting series of tapes. Like he was incredible. Like now, okay, this is the like he was incredible in the 90s. I think he publishes 2 or 3 books in the 90s on top of a report every 6 months. He's traveling around the United States. He's bringing Marcus Garvey's son to SUNY to talk about Marcus Garvey's struggle. He is going and doing lectures around the country. He's pushing these Black Studies department who are on the verge of change, and he's like, you know, I don't have them in my possession, but he's writing to Harvard, and he's like, what are you doing? Why is your university trash? At SUNY New Paltz, writing to Harvard, being like, you're trash, right? In more eloquent intellectual terms, but that's brilliant. That sort of confidence and dedication. He's growing institutions. In the relationship, the African Roots Center, A.J. Williams Myers African Roots Center is the first institution. There's the Sadie Delaney Peterson Library, who's named after the first and legendary Black bibliophile who says black books change kids' lives. It'll change their financial situation, their social situation, their economic situation. And that's the first one, and he helps found that, right? He believes in it so much. He's also the lead historian on the African burial ground in New York City, right? So he's creating a burial ground in New York City. He's the lead researcher. Out of all the historians in New York in the 90s, at Columbia, at Rutgers, wherever, he's the lead historian. So he believes in it. He really believes in it. That's all I can say. Yes.
Thank you very much for this presentation. You actually blew my mind, right? I'm feeling all kinds of warm and fuzzy right now. Right? And I'm sorry. I did invite AJ, and he was on a panel here in 2019.
Okay.
Right. But outside of that experience, I have not been able to engage them in any significant way, and I'm partly responsible for it. Right? That being said, given all the things that you have said, AJ seemed to be an Afrocentrist to the extent that where though he prioritized culture. Right? You got a lot of black studies departments and they prioritize race. He prioritizes culture as a lens through which we start to understand our person and our identity. Right? What was his relationship like with other Afrocentrists, such as, well, do you know, like Leonard Jeffries, Malefi Keti Asante, Maulana Karenga, Chancellor Williams, other individuals?
I know he has correspondence with First Homie.
Malefi Keti Asante?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know about his relationships to others, but one of these reports that I didn't put on the board is, it's an additional, right? They come back and they say like, multiculturalism is problematic, but instead of saying that, they say Afrocentrism is problematic. And they say, you're trying to erase our curriculum and place Afrocentrism in there. And then he goes to town and he's like, you know, this is a racist conversation. This is a racial, like you're erasing this identity. This is what you're doing. And he cites all of those people. And I hope I'm going to try and I'll scan it in the next, millennia and send it to you. But he's there and he's supportive of it.
Thank you. I just wanted to add something to the conversation. I just went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art over the break and the Brooklyn Museum. They both have committed exhibits at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the largest museum in the nation. Before you go into Egypt, it's called The African Origin of Civilization. You got to go through Africa and understand that black people created all of this stuff. That's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art right now, and the Brooklyn Museum. They have a plaque as they go into Egypt talking about how racist anthropology was, and this is all black people stuff. So that's what's going on. I know that he would be proud of that, and he actually contributed to that by his work in a variety of different ways.
I mean, and that's it. It's like, we don't know. Like, like 10 years we could work on this collectively. We still wouldn't know. Like, he's so impactful. There's also, in addition, supporting that, go to the Met if you feel comfortable and can. The Afrofuturism house about the Seneca Village is also there. It's the most, it's beautiful. It's a really beautiful exhibit. There's also an exhibit opening Friday at Dorsky that's going to be really beautiful about freedom dreams. I don't remember the full title, but that is also going to be a beautiful exhibit from people all across the United States contributing work at a really high level of quality.
Thanks for sharing.
Of course. Yes?
I just would like to share something.
Do you want to? Just so we can record.
Okay. AJ was a friend of mine. He belonged to a group, Concerned Parents of New Paltz, which Diana and myself are a part of. He was very community-minded. I was an adjunct here for a few years, and I would always invite AJ to come in each semester. And I would assign a chapter of one of his books, Destructive Impulses, if you've read that. And he would come in and he would speak to my class.
No, you're fine. I just got to hold them both.
Oh, okay. I don't know what that was. Okay. And one story that I wanted to share that he shared was that he always would speak to my students and tell them how when he was in 8th grade and was looking at different high schools to go to, how the guidance counselor told him that he really should go to a trade school because you people are good with your hands. And here, you have this brilliant man, PhD, and just brilliant. And it really made a difference for my students to hear this, to have this such eloquent speaker come in and actually share this story. AJ was a wonderful person who, when my son, who's black, was mistreated by the police, he was there at the police commission with me, to support, myself and my son. And he was there with other members of the community and of Concerned Parents to help the black people in the New Paltz community that were being mistreated by the police, by the schools. And I just wanted to share that. And thank you so much for coming to honor him. He was a wonderful, wonderful man.
Thank you for sharing that. That's so powerful. Yeah, and applause. both for going through that, because you don't want to I think there's this myth that you want to go against the police every day, but it's the last thing you want to do. But when injustice happens, you have to stand up and you have to shut it down. Some of us do want to go against. Anyway, any other questions or comments? Yes.
On this, so just like this.
Yeah.
As a student and member of New Paltz, I just want to say thank you to everyone here, and it's an honor to be a student of the Black Studies Department, because I'm proud of where I come from and I'm proud to be here. And I'd also like to ask, is there any kind of volunteer opportunity for the African Roots Center? Because I would love to be involved. So cool, I like that reaction.
Yeah. Always. We're gonna do some. Yeah, we're growing. We're growing in a way. Well, thank you for investing yourself in Black Studies. Right. Thank you for dedicating your life to that, because the lens, and you may have already understand this, you may already recognize what's going to happen, but you have this for the rest of your life, right? For the rest of your life, this is how you will think. And that is such a gift, because you'll probably be one of the smarter people in the room. It may take some time, but y'all know. And in terms of the African Roots Center, we need help cataloging more books, we need help digitizing things, we need help fundraising, we need anything, whatever skills you got. How about that? Whatever you want to bring to the table, whatever you're capable of doing, just come through. It's really there's this myth that in order to participate in this movement, you have to have a special skill set, but you probably already have skills that are needed in this place. So, whatever you want to think about, lecture series, ice cream social.
I'm all for it.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that.
I can say something.
Yeah.
I feel like I need to in a way.
Hi, my name is Katari. I used to go by Gallo. I chose my name based off of my roots, where I'm from, and studying my history. That's a different story, but so I go by Katari. But I think I'm not sure. When we work together, have I met AJ before? Have we been in the same room? Because I'm just kind of honestly overtaken about the ways that I don't even know that I've been impacted by the people who've been involved in the struggle for so long, and I'm just incredibly grateful to have just been in that moment where I was part of that group of students that helped spread the message of Paul Eccles being attacked by the police officer in New Paltz. And something I will never forget was that at the time that we were spreading this message and supporting him at court and raising money, because eventually we found out that there were some court fees, even though he was not, they didn't charge him with anything, but there were some kind of court fees. We had been talking with another student who was also attacked, this time on campus by police on campus for refusing to show his student ID while he was inside a building, and he was thrown to the ground. It wasn't even for not refusing to show his ID. It was because he had parked his car in the parking lot in a weird way while he was taking out his groceries. It was just terrible. And he was thrown to the ground, and the same student organization that I was with offered him our support, even if it was just someone to talk to, because not everyone's ready to pursue that kind of thing and make it a big fuss. But through us, we told him about Paul's story. And that student, a couple days after I met with him, and I remember we talked in the building right over there where they sell the food, and he learned about Paul's story, and he paid all of Paul's court fees. He donated the entire I think it was $200 and something to pay Paul's court fees. And it's just this incredible connection of people. It's just people. It's literally just people coming together and knowing what's right and trying to do something around it. And it's just crazy. And it's something that I'll never forget because it was just like a random student just learning about somebody in trouble. And he was like, I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to have someone put their hands on me and disrespect me and make me feel like I was less than a human being like that. And I'm going to support this person. And that was just incredible. And I guess I just wanted to share that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, that was really powerful. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. It's like, this is just people, right? This is just people. AJ was just a person doing the work, and just dedicated to doing the work. And you know, I'm excited to hear about the growth of Black Studies. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to have this series. I really think AJ would be so optimistic about what we can do and where we can go. Any last questions? Thank you. Thank you, AJ.
Dad.